are back now with Bill Gates, whose foundation has already committed more than $250 million to fighting COVID-19. Let me ask you about the economy. When trying to open up, one of the challenges is some states are opening up earlier than others. Some countries are opening up earlier. Can we be sure, that we know what exactly the right levers are and how to open up? And I ask this because there are a lot of governors, for example, who are criticizing the predictions that were made. The Florida governor says, look, there were all these models that predicted to us that we would need 200,000, 300,000 hospital beds in use for COVID. We have 2,000 beds. In other words, the predictions were way off. We didn't, and the implication is they didn't do an enormous amount of the hardcore lockdown, and they're still okay. What do you say to them?
Well, I wouldn't say they're okay. They're not suffering as widespread an epidemic yet. If they open up enough, they can go back into exponential growth and, compete with New York on that basis. The uncertainties about this mean that because of the exponential nature of this, yes, some models were wildly wrong. Models are never going to be perfect in these things, but we can learn, when you have countries that are sending, say, young children back to school, Germany, Denmark, Austria have a good enough testing regime, more competent than the U.S., so they actually will be able to see the effect of that. Norway's actually doing it in a differential within different parts of the country, which will help inform us. The problem with the United States is that unless you interdict travel, any state that goes too far and gets into that exponential growth will be seeding other parts of the country. And so it'll be like international travel, where you have force of infection coming in, and that's very tricky to deal with. But, the need for the testing piece, I haven't found anyone to argue with it, but they're not stepping up to actually do it yet, and that's got to be the federal level.
So everyone says when we open, it's going to be slow. It's only going to be parts of the economy. People have estimated 20%, 30%. Give us, the best case scenario. You've heard this metaphor of the hammer and the dance. The dance being now you start opening up the economy, and through a kind of moderate amount of social distancing, you are able to achieve. What will we be able to achieve? What's the good case scenario?
The best case is you pick the high value activities like school, manufacturing, construction, and figure out a way to do those with kind of masks and distancing. In the school, you don't want the hallways to have tons of kids all at once, or the lunchroom. And then you can see, are those schools a source of infection spreading up into the elderly, which then, would cause some level of mortality. I'm hopeful
Bill,
there will be a way.
Can I just ask you about schools, because everyone is so curious and worried about this. You have 3 kids. You know how schools work. I mean, lots of people crowded together in classrooms and dormitories, in hallways. That is almost the definition of school. How do you get it going?
Well, certainly for the younger age kids, where the online substitute is inferior, more inferior than as you get up, say, to college level, that online can capture, at least in terms of the academics, a lot of what goes on. There, what we've seen in terms of infection levels is pretty low, and you do have some European countries that are moving ahead with that, and because of their testing, will understand what the viral load is, and compare households with kids going to school versus households that don't have that coming in. So over the course of this summer, some of that will be learned, and in the fall, that will be one of the toughest questions. It's right on the boundary of, is there a tasteful way to do it that particularly for the low-income students, where the online learning hasn't been fully enabled because either they don't have the equipment or the connection, or their teacher isn't set up for it. The inequity has gotten greater in education. So if we can figure out how to do K through 12 in the fall, that would be good. I even think if we're creative about it and things have gone well, we'll be able to do college. But there's a lot of data we'll be learning from globally and we'll see the progress on the tools as well that will inform those decisions. So it'll probably be in August where, the idea of what's the protocol, how many schools are opening up, that, we won't really know enough until pretty close to the start.
So you've written both in your paper that's on your on Gates Notes, which I really recommend people read, and you've said elsewhere, the economy is not going to be anything like it was. It's going to take a long time to recover. It's going to be, people are going to be surprised at how slow and how fitful this is. So what is it that the stock market is seeing that you, Bill Gates, are not seeing? The stock market is now basically at a routine annual correction. It seems, it is not really factoring in, it seems to me, the kind of economy you're describing.
Well, some companies, their valuation, if you took out 2 years of earnings, there's still enough earnings out in years 3 to N that the valuation wouldn't change that much. And, if you have companies that don't run into a liquidity problem and whose long-term profitability is strong, then the valuation adjustment isn't necessarily that dramatic. You do have an economy that's going to be operating at a lower level, and that affects all sorts of spending. There's no doubt that'll be the case for years to come. And so that should affect overall valuations. There aren't that many great investments. I mean, buying treasury bills right now doesn't seem that attractive. So I'm not as, I'm an expert on vaccines and therapy. I talk to people about the economy. Like you, I find it a little surprising where the market is. But, I'm not going to focus on that.
Are you surprised that Microsoft, for example, is trading at the same price that it was in December, before, the coronavirus?
Tech companies in some ways benefit from an acceleration of a move towards digital approaches, even though their next few years, they'll have a lot of customers that they'll be, helping out, giving free licenses to, where things won't be as strong. So, if there's any sector of the economy where you could say, okay, it's not that drastic of a change, you'd probably pick that. But again, valuations is not where I add the most value.